Fantastic Beasts: The Crimes of Grindelwald was released in 2018 and was directed by David Yates and written once again by J.K. Rowling in her second ever screenwriting credit, and is the second installment in the Fantastic Beasts franchise and follows Newt Scamander and Albus Dumbledore as they attempt to take down the dark wizard Grindelwald while facing new threats in a more divided wizarding world. I reviewed this film once before, back when it was released in 2018, and much like the rest of the world, I found myself very disappointed with this sequel, but still found it better than people gave it credit for. I feel like when something comes out that's considered not all that good, people tend to bring out the hyperbolic statements and convince themselves that there's simply nothing good in something, which I found to be rarely the case, even in some pretty bad movies. But back in 2018, I never found this movie bad, just very disappointing. And since then, I have rewatched it twice, once for this review, and my opinion has been pretty much all over the place, from finding it okay but disappointing, to underrated, to a bland mess that's still kind of sort of okay. And that last one is where I'm currently at when it comes to my opinion. The Crimes of Grindelwald is not as bad as its reputation, but it is not as great of a film either, and I have some theories as to why it is the way it is when I get to it. But you know me, I'm all about providing positivity where there seems to be a lack of it online, especially in the movie world. So I'm here to give this movie its due with a fair shot. But before we go into my thoughts, let's do what we always do here and go behind the scenes to see just how this film was made. The Fantastic Beasts franchise was initially announced as a trilogy of films, and by 2016, Rowling was already at work on the second film's screenplay with ideas for a third film. By October of 2016, though, it was announced that the series would move from being a trilogy to a 5-film franchise, with Eddie Redmayne returning to play Newt Scamander in the sequels. David Yates was also signed on to return as director, with previous producers Rowling, David Heyman, and Steve Kloves returning as well, with the next film being set in a different global capital, and the story was taking on a different feel from the first and introducing new characters to fill out the larger universe. Johnny Depp was cast in the film, already having a cameo appearance at the end of the first film. His casting was also met with criticism due to the domestic violence allegations against him and actress Amber Heard, already starting the film off with bad press and controversy. Much of the first film's cast would also return, with Jude Law being cast as a young Albus Dumbledore after toying with the idea of having Michael Gambon return, which was shut down by David Yates. The film would be set in both the UK and Paris, with principal photography beginning on July 3rd of 2017 at Warner Brothers Studios in Leavesden, England, where part of Paris was built, which included the streets, alleys, and square. The New York set was built in the exact same spot previously. Principal photography would officially wrap in December of that same year. Music for the film was once again done by James Newton Howard, who continued building off of the work done in the first film and adding to the musical score. Visual effects were done by Double Negative, Framestore, Method Studios, and Image Engine, similar to the first film, with ILM also adding to the effects with concept design and development. The film had its world premiere in Paris on November 8th, 2018, and was released worldwide on the 16th. The film received a huge box office drop compared to the previous film, which nearly grossed $1 billion at the worldwide box office. This time, it only made $654.9 million on a budget of $200 million, making it a success but a box office disappointment. Added to this was the largely mixed to negative reception to the film, making it the lowest rated Wizarding World film with a 36% approval rating on Rotten Tomatoes and an average rating of a 5.3 out of 10 Audience scores were also lower, averaging at a B+ on a poll done by CinemaScore. Many critics found the film a cluttered expansion of the franchise with little tension and excessive plotting. Praise was given to both Eddie Redmayne and Jude Law's Dumbledore, but the reception was far from what Warner Brothers had been hoping for. Due to the box office and critical reception of the film, the franchise was put on a bit of a hiatus to reevaluate its potential moving forward, and Steve Kloves would come in for the sequel to help J.K. Rowling in writing the third film that would work as a potential ending for the franchise, with the promise of more if the box office for the film was good. Now, with all of that out of the way, let's go into my thoughts on the film. The Crimes of Grindelwald truly is one of the most disappointing films I've ever seen. As someone that will defend the first Fantastic Beasts film as one of the best Wizarding World films, after leaving that movie, there was so much promise for this new franchise, and the pieces were all there to make a prequel franchise that could stand on its own and bring the whimsy and magic of the Harry Potter franchise back in a big way. And sadly, this film failed to deliver on most of that. But I don't think it's all a downward slope for this film. There's quite a bit that I do like. But mostly this film ends up being a jumbled mess of too many ideas presented all at once and feels like it would make for a good book. But if this was a book, there would be parts of that book that would be stripped down to make it work better on film. And where I thought Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them showed some of J.K. Rowling's strengths as a screenwriter and proved to me that she could succeed in this medium, The Crimes of Grindelwald showed me that perhaps the screenplay medium is not Rowling's wheelhouse, because most of my problems with the film stem from the rather interesting but fairly bland events of its screenplay, and just how much it's trying to jumble in a story that's, on paper, sounds simple, but in the end is just overly complex and unnecessarily so. Let's start with the stuff I think this film does very well, starting with Newt Scamander himself. I loved this character in the first film, and he's just as great here, and Eddie Redmayne does such a phenomenal job of being the frontman for this franchise. He provides so much passion and charisma to this awkward performance, and is just a quirky, obtuse character that is easy to fall in love with. He's an underdog and just wants to continue his work as a magizoologist, but is thrust into a war when Grindelwald begins bringing together followers to start a wizarding war. His relationship with No-Maj Jacob is also heartwarming, and it's always fun to see Redmayne and Dan Fogler working off each other. Dan Fogler's Jacob Kowalski is just the heart and soul of this trilogy and brings a lot of energy to the franchise. And then you have Jude Law as a young Dumbledore. I still find it hard to picture this Dumbledore as becoming either the Richard Harris or Michael Gambon Dumbledores with his fancy modern looking suits, but regardless, Jude Law is just great in this rather small role that resorts to nothing more than an extended cameo. But for the time he's in the film, he's great. The way he cracks jokes to the pain you feel for him as he thinks back to moments in his past that he regrets. It's really great seeing him in this film. And yes, let's talk about Johnny Depp. Johnny Depp had an upward battle in this film. For one, the stuff with Amber Heard was front and center, hurting his reputation. And by this time in his career, it's obvious that despite people liking Johnny Depp, we had begun to grow tired of his wild and out there performances, where he was no longer playing a character, but it was Johnny Depp merely playing a character. And though I feel he was ultimately miscast in this franchise, and his replacement, Mads Mikkelsen, was more fitting for the role, I think Depp ends up doing a solid enough job of being intimidating and a real force to be reckoned with in this film. And I thought he left a positive impression on me by the end of the movie, especially in the beginning where his performance is in nothing but silence, and especially the end, where we see how Grindelwald can easily manipulate others to his cause. I think Depp does a great job in these scenes and genuinely left me wanting more with him. But for obvious reasons, we never would, and I think they probably made a good decision with the recasting for the third film in the end. I also think the opening of this film and the entire third act are just thrilling. Yates has improved so much in his direction of these films, and with his many coordinators was able to craft a memorable and very moody opening scene that sets the darker tone for the rest of the film with Grindelwald's breakout over the Hudson. There's so much tension. The music, tense. The shots are all beautifully composed, and the breakout is a thrilling ride from beginning to end, and even a bit scary at times. It's a great introduction to our villain and shows how clever he can be to outwit others in the wizarding community. The third act is also really chilling, and one of the darkest finales in the Wizarding World franchise. From Grindelwald calling his followers across all of Paris to their meeting where he declares war on the Muggle world. It's a rousing scene and feels so intense as Newt and them are deep in the lair of the enemy. One of my favorite moments too is when Grindelwald uses a fancy magical hookah to show everyone a vision of World War II and even the Holocaust. It shows what's at stake in the coming films and ends the film on a very down note, as our heroes don't really have much of a victory. There's other moments throughout that I quite enjoy, such as when the film decides to actually focus on Newt and the Fantastic Beasts the franchise is named after. But these moments are sadly few and far between. I also think this film looks really good. I loved the cinematography in the first Fantastic Beast. Philippe Roselot returns and gives us another gorgeous looking movie that lacks more of the color of the previous film due to the darker nature of the story, but there are hopeful moments throughout where color seeps back into the picture, and it just looks really good. This is a beautiful looking movie, I think, and much like with the first film, James Newton Howard's score is exciting, enchanting, and captures the magic in this world, similar to how John Williams did for the first three Harry Potter themes. There's a magic in these Fantastic Beasts movies that gets lost in all the controversies and some of the more lackluster moments, but it is there. Now, I'm afraid we have to talk about my problems with this film. I wanted to start right out by saying everything I like about this movie because I don't want to be negative in my reviews. I want to stay positive as much as I can, and I'm probably more positive for this film than most people have been, but I cannot deny this movie has a fair share of problems, mainly in its screenplay, and it all stems from this. There's just too much happening in this film, and along the way, it loses sight of what the core of this series probably should have been. Now, it's easy to just go ahead and blame J.K. Rowling for all the movie's problems when it comes to the screenplay because she wrote it, and she's a very problematic figure, and I obviously don't know everything about the behind the scenes of this film, but based off of what I know from the pre-production of even the third film, and the original idea by Rowling to have that film take place in Brazil, I feel studio mandates were in play to turn Fantastic Beasts into another Harry Potter. The first film was a simple story about Newt Scamander running around New York collecting Fantastic Beasts and eventually getting mixed up in a plot by Grindelwald. I feel as if this was the original trajectory of the series before things changed, because it's clear in the first film that the crimes of Grindelwald is no longer the story of Newt Scamander, but rather the story of Grindelwald's conflict with the wizarding world and his inner conflict with Albus Dumbledore. I would be fine with this story if it wasn't the major conflict, because now you have this first film that just doesn't fit as well into the story of the next two films. This movie also has to juggle between so many characters, both returning and new faces. Jacob and Queenie return, and their romance, which was a huge high of the first one, is done a bit dirty for the sake of conflict. And Tina and Newt's is done similarly as well, and everyone is just rather unhappy in the film. There's also Credence Barebone returning as he's searching for his real mother. Tina is searching for him. Newt is helping Dumbledore find Grindelwald. We have one character looking for Credence who might be a distant relative of his. And then we have Grindelwald trying to take over. Any one of these plots would be fascinating as a singular major conflict, but Rowling tries to fit them all together, and the film just buckles under the weight of all these plot lines, and it just falls apart in the end. That's why the middle of this film was so unengaging to me. There was just far too much going on, and it was so unfocused, and any one of these plot lines ended up feeling like the main plot. And in the third act, they're meant to all converge like a tightly put together puzzle. But even when you get to that point in the film, there's last minute exposition that stops the film in its tracks, and it makes for a very disjointed and at times frustrating watching experience. What's also frustrating too is the large amount of fan service put into the film that sadly isn't even the fun kind, but just embellishes and complicates things we already know in the wizarding world that we're fine not bothering with. Moments like Nagini being a lady with a blood curse, or Nicholas Flamel, or Credence being a Dumbledore, which is the big reveal at the end of this movie. The Crimes of Grindelwald is a frustrating film to watch. It has all the makings of a great movie, but it tries to do too much in the same runtime that the first film's very simple story had. It has its moments. It's great seeing all our favorite characters from the first film again, but there's just not a lot of heart or soul in this one. It's packed so tightly with plot that the story never gets to breathe, and you're ultimately left with a very disappointing experience. The cinematography, performances, and music, and some ideas and set pieces are all good, and Jude Law is a standout, but nothing truly gets to shine in this one, and it ends up being the worst of the Wizarding World franchise by a mile. But I could never say it's a bad film. There's good things here, but not enough to save the film from mediocrity. So, with all that said, I'm going to give Fantastic Beasts: The Crimes of Grindelwald a 6 out of 10. I debated on giving this film a 5 out of 10 while watching it, but the third act managed to wrap me back in by the end. But the experience as a whole just left me unenthused. I am excited to see how this franchise comes to an end with The Secrets of Dumbledore, which I haven't seen since its theatrical release. But anyway, as always, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel, and stay positive.